All right, and we're recording. Let me do this real quick. Okay. Welcome to the Bluntness. I'm your host, Gregory Frye, executive editor at the Bluntness, and we have a very special guest today, Niambe McIntosh, the youngest child of the revolutionary musician and activist Peter Tosh. Nyambe is a Renaissance woman serving many roles, including the head of the Peter Tosh estate and brand, managing member of Tosh Holdings, board chairperson for the Peter Tosh Foundation, and so much more. Nyambe, welcome to the Bluntness. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Thank you. Thanks, Gregory, so much for having me on the show.
Did I pronounce your last name correctly, by the way?
You did. McIntosh, yes.
Okay.
I get a lot of McIntoshes, but it's Mac.
Well, look, I want to dive straight into, like, for me, it's really exciting to be able to talk to you about Peter Tosh, your father. I know you were quite young when he passed away, which is a gut-wrenching story in of itself. But I wonder, though, if you could just reflect on Peter Tosh for a minute. What comes to your mind when you start thinking about him and who he was?
Yeah, well, he was a founding member of the iconic band, the Wailers, before management came in later on and made them Bob Marley and the Wailers. He was a founding member, contributed grossly to the writing, to the composition, to the sound of reggae that we know today. And then shortly, had a great career there, but then proceeded to have his solo career, and that's when he wrote the song for the movement, which is Legalize It. And that was an album, a platinum selling album to this day. And, he was a firm follower of Rastafari and a staunch believer in equal rights and justice. And his music spoke to that message, and a Pan-Africanist as well. He believed that all and believed and knew that all Black people, no matter what nationality, no matter where you are, originally we all came from Africa and wanted that unity amongst us as a people.
I was thinking about those values preparing for our talk today, and part of me always wonders, I think what's natural for people to wonder, what would Peter Tosh think about the situation today, whether it's with race or with the cannabis situation? And well, we have the answer. A lot of it's in his music. Mm-hmm. And part of what you're doing is keeping that legacy alive and spreading that legacy to new generations. And I wonder if we could sort of get into some of the projects that you're working on with the Peter Tosh Foundation, the Peter Tosh legacy and brand, all of it.
Definitely. And so I am the youngest of his 10 children. And ironically, I've been, appointed, so to speak, to be the head of his legacy and brand. And in that capacity, I look for every opportunity to carry on his message, creatively, and commercially as well. But, and taking on that capacity, it was only 2009, 2010 that I've been in charge. Before then, it actually was run by a public administrator. But I knew that it was very important for us to start a foundation in his name, with everything that he stood for, being a staunch advocate for legalization and not only advocating for it, but living it. There's people will ask, you Google his name now and you see him with a spliff in his hand and in his mouth in just about every picture. But many people don't know that he suffered a lot because of that. People assume that, oh, you can walk around in Jamaica just fine, but he was a target, and so it wasn't an easy task. It was something that he truly did fight for and wanted to be the exemplar as cannabis being, his human right to consume a plant that he knew was medicinally and spiritually beneficial. And so in starting the foundation, it was very important that we have initiatives around not only one of our primary focuses is legalize it, where it's really education and about the medicinal benefits, the spiritual benefits. We also have partnerships with Minorities for Medical Marijuana so that we can really highlight and connect those that have been most impacted by the war on drugs to benefit from this new and emerging industry. We also have an initiative for the Peter Tosh Museum. We opened up a Peter Tosh Museum in Kingston, Jamaica. It was in 2016, and it was very important for us for the world really, to have a place where they can learn about his legacy and see artifacts. He rode a unicycle. He would speak about the importance of, mind and body and balance. He was just extremely talented. We also have the Justice for Jawara initiative, and I know that we'll get into that a little bit more, and that's really to highlight his story. And then the Equal Rights and Justice Initiative really allows us to partner with different organizations around the globe, and with a primary focus in Africa to do community projects within the continent. And then we have Can't Blame the Youth initiative. My father was an educator, that's what his music was for. And that initiative really serves as a tool to uplift and inspire young people through his music and his message.
Wow, a lot going on. And I think the site's petertoshfoundation.com, right?
Correct.
So people should definitely go there to learn more. And you mentioned Minorities for Medical Cannabis, and it seems like such one of many important areas that we could discuss together. In terms of safe access, education. I don't know. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about where your thoughts are, your focus is there with the Minorities for Medical Cannabis project.
Yeah. So I'm also a board member of Minorities for Medical Marijuana, and we've come a long way in really developing programs so that minorities that have been impacted by the war on drugs can actually have a seat at the table when it comes to getting into this new and emerging industry. We've done expungement clinics. We've held boot camps really around programming for those that have been impacted to have a strategic way to access the cannabis industry, because although it's slowly becoming legal in many, many states, unfortunately, Black and brown faces are not the ones being represented in the industry. And so we have programming really to streamline those that have been impacted. And we also have relationships with historically Black colleges so that we can really highlight the talent there to get more of us access into the industry, but also a tool to educate us, and a platform to educate us. We've done some great partnerships with Curaleaf as well, where they have funded a lot of the programs that we have, which is wonderful.
Right. Minorities for Medical Marijuana. I said medical cannabis.
It happens.
Minorities for Medical Marijuana.
Yeah.
It is very lopsided. Last I saw, 4% of cannabis business owners are Black. 4%. Yeah. That's insane.
Yes. And so although there's so many states that have the language and within the regulations about social equity and equity applicants being all these programs, but the real issue is funding. We are unable to compete with these major corporations unless they're the regulations are also including some sort of funding to be able to sustain these companies that are held by Black and brown people.
And you also have an international focus with cannabis, is that right?
Yes. We are developing some relationships also with the Rastafari community and compounds within Jamaica, and really supporting their ability to sustain themselves. These are the original people that sacrificed for their livelihood and their dignity to get the plant out to the world. This is that they are the original kind of founders of the industry, so to speak. Many people didn't know about cannabis until they heard reggae music, and so we are working to really help sustain these amazing communities that really uphold a lot of the indigenous practices that come from Africa, and so it's another focus that we have as well.
And I wonder if you could talk for a minute about what is Rastafari. I think a lot of people don't really know. They're thinking about the music, the
and the ganja,
right? And the ganja. People like your dad, but it's more of a philosophy, I understand.
Yes, it's more of a philosophy and a way of life. And so Jamaica was colonized first by Spain, but then later on in the 1700s by Britain. And so the entire identity of the African people that were brought to Jamaica was pretty much mandated by the colonizers. And that included the religion of Christianity that was kind of forced on enslaved African people so that they wouldn't rebel. And so after Jamaica gained its independence in the 60s, but actually in the 1930s was when some Jamaicans started to kind of have an awakening and realizing that their identity, isn't necessarily what was mandated, and they were really seeking some of those African roots. And so out of that resistance from kind of that counterculture, they started to seek out their own indigenous practices and beliefs, and that was born. That was the birth of Rastafari. And so it's an ideology that really is very simple. It's one love. It's that's a message that stands very, very firm in the practices, but also holding on to the indigenous practices and living on natural foods and a natural mindset. It's balance really within the ecosystem, and understanding that and respecting the earth in that way, but also recognizing the plant, the cannabis plant, as a sacrament. When there is a sacrament that happens on the Sabbath for many followers of Rastafari, but not all, that's an opportunity for them to be in tuned and enlightened with a higher power and with the source. And I think that's something that most of us, when we consume, even if you're at a party, there's this you have this moment where you're happy. And I think that happiness is a part of healthiness, and really helps a lot of people connect to just something that we all should hold sacred.
This is fascinating. So the idea was to only use cannabis on the Sabbath? No.
But on the Sabbath was when it was most sacred. It was the part of this practice, but consuming was really a way of life. It was, we understood it as something that was, that is still very special and serves as, to have medicinal, spiritual, and just a value to happiness.
I feel like I could nerd out with you on this all day. It's so fascinating to learn about this, and sounds like definitely people I would love to be around and celebrate with.
Definitely.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I wonder if you have any Peter Tosh stories that you'd like to share, some of your favorite stories, and some, I know there's some important stories that aren't so pleasant, but I think we should also share, when he was brutally beaten for cannabis. Is what I was specifically referring to there, but what stories come to your mind?
I mean, the one that you mentioned is a testament to why we have International Peter Tosh Day on 420.
Yeah.
And so it was the One Love Peace concert, and Bob, this is when they had kind of separated, but Bob was performing, and then Peter was performing after. And Bob, was really, he had the song One Love at the time, and really was about the union of both political parties. There was a lot of government officials. This was a concert in Jamaica in the 1970s. And when my father got on stage, he really was about speaking truth about what some of the injustices were going on within the country, from the lack of access to education, lack of employment, the corruption that was happening amongst politicians and political parties. And, that I think really highlights the difference, when it comes to Bob and Peter. Oftentimes people will say that Bob is more like Malcolm X, and I mean, Bob is more like Martin Luther King, and my dad was more like Malcolm X, more of, he didn't hold his tongue, so to speak. And not too long after that performance, he was targeted by the police and beaten almost nearly to death. He actually had to pretend to be dead in order for the police to leave him alone. But one of the tools that they would use is often, justification through cannabis. They would see him with a spliff and then immediately target him. And that's, holds true still to this day in how policing is done within this country. And so, that's a story that really speaks to his true sacrifice. It wasn't the first time that he had been targeted, nor was it the first time that he had been brutalized, but that is definitely one of the more known instances. I also like to kind of talk about, that although many people see him in media and knew him, his public persona, to be very, very serious, he was actually a very fun-loving individual and very kind. My mom used to say that if you're hanging around with him, he's like, you're just laughing all day. He was a man that was very charismatic, but also, liked to joke a lot, liked to have fun, like to always give, people around him opportunities to make a little bit of money. And he's always sharing his ganja. It was just, he was very, he was a kind soul. And I think that's something that many people, didn't see in the public eye, as well as amazingly talented. He knew how to play over 20 plus instruments. It was self-taught. He actually made his first guitar at the age of 5 out of a sardine pan, which is like, I'm like, I don't even know how you do that. I'm like, I have no idea. But that's the level of talent that he brought to the Wailers. He, Get Up, Stand Up. He, wrote that song, and I was told by one of the band members that when he was in the studio, he really orchestrated the sound. He would jump on and say, no, you want to play the sound like this, and jump on the guitar, and then jump on, the drum, and really kind of highlight the sound that he wanted to create when making music. So he was amazingly talented. And then to, also just knowing how to ride the unicycle. I have tried many a times. I have another brother who can ride, and a nephew who can ride, his son, Andrew. Andrew's a musician as well, Andrew Tosh. And I jump on thinking that it must be genetic. I'm sure I can just jump on and ride, but it is not. He's just been someone that, his spirit for people that knew him, definitely has inspired many. And then what's awesome is that his message is timeless. So I've met people that, like you said, just go into a deep dive, relatively, recent, and fall in love with the story. He has an amazing story. And so, and that connects to some of the projects that we're working on now, as far as a major motion film and a theatrical play. And so, and a documentary. These are all things that we know are important to really reintroduce him to the next generation.
Can you talk about where those projects are in development?
Still in the works. We've gone through different producers and such, and different scripts, and his story is not an easy one to tell. There's so many elements to his story, and so it's gone through several iterations that we're still working on it. Definitely still working on it.
You're still looking to get the screenplay dialed in.
Yes. Yeah.
You hear that, screenwriters?
Yeah, there's so many elements to his story, from the time with the Wailers to his solo career, and then just who he was as a person. He was just multifaceted. Had a black belt in martial arts, and I could go on. He was. If you listen to some of the older Wailers, like from the 60s, he was able to sing soprano in the highest note, to the point where you would think that it was a woman doing the backup vocals, and then alto to the deepest, and lowest low. And so he just had this musical ability that many people don't know. He actually taught Bob Marley how to play the guitar, and so there's so much to the story that I'm excited to be a part of, leading this project and having this responsibility. Definitely is. I'm honored to kind of be at the head, and knowing that anything that comes out really legitimately, that's not bootleg, is the family is behind the project.
Yes. Now I wanted to ask you that there's a biography, Step and Razor, The Life of Peter Tosh. Have you read that? Is that worth a read? Is that a good account of? It's
definitely a very dense text. There is some good information in there. And John Missouri is a great writer. It hasn't been, it's not like an official biography that has been released from the estate, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I won't put you on the spot and ask you who might play Peter Tosh in the movie, unless you already have somebody in mind. We don't have to go there.
Not yet.
Wow. It's such a beautiful life, a life worth celebrating. It makes so much sense to have 420 be International Peter Tosh Day. That's how it's articulated, International Peter Tosh Day. So apropos. And I definitely want to help spread that around next April. And it seems like his life serves as a true, what's the word? A true paradigm, or almost a guiding light. It's a microcosm for the soul of cannabis and its relationship with humanity, from the benefits and incorporating it into one's life, to the struggles, with authority and restriction and hatred and fear. I think that And, you know, and it's when you talk about the story of your brother, Justice for Jawara, it hits you even more deeply than, you know, there's a lot of people who lost their lives in the cannabis war against cannabis, but this one, I don't, you know, your brother was a beautiful human being. He was a musician, and he was arrested in 2017 for cannabis possession, and he was beaten in prison and was in a coma for a year and passed away last July. That is a horrific thing that should have never happened. And I don't know what you want to say about that, but I definitely want to hear your thoughts about what happened. But also, I want to know more about who your brother was as a man. I understand he was a father and had a lot of, you know, positive things going on in his life. And what do you want to say about your brother?
Yeah, Jawara is, because his spirit lives on, the youngest son of my dad, and I'm the youngest child. He was a year and a half older than me, and it was actually 2013 when he was arrested for cannabis possession. It was Father's Day weekend, and he had been held in Bergen County Jail in New Jersey for about 3 months without a hearing, which we are from Massachusetts. We're based in Boston, Massachusetts. And typically you get arrested, your hearing's like the next day, unless it's on the weekend. But New Jersey has this kind of archaic system, in Bergen County in particular, and Hackensack. It's this kind of that's this prison economy where you see like bail's bondmen's on every corner, and you walk into the court and it seems as though, you know, everyone working there is treating everyone like a convict, or like, you know, just less than human, because even now these words, convict and criminal and all of these words, really dehumanize human beings, and I'm very hesitant to use them. But so he was in jail for about 3 months before his hearing, and at that time, my mom, myself, his girlfriend at the time, and we all came up to support him for the hearing. And honestly, I thought it was going to be something that would just be put behind us. You know, he's never been involved with the criminal justice system before. He's a follower of Rastafari, a father of four, an activist, and an extremely talented musician as well. Sounds just like my dad. And he was able to give me the gift of hearing my dad's voice, which was amazing when I first heard him, because he didn't start off doing reggae. But so we came down, and that's when we heard the prosecution offer a 20-year plea, and they had set the bail at $200,000, and this was all over cannabis. And at that moment was when I really knew that this was more than what I thought it was. This is, you know, gonna be a bigger issue within our family. Fortunately, 3 months later, in December of 2013, he was able to post bail. And from 2013 to the end of 2016, he kind of was going back and forth to New Jersey for pretrial motions. And so first they're like, well, you know, we'll bring it down to 10 years. You know, this is the best that we can offer. You need to take it, because if you go to court, you know, they're going to hit you with the full sentencing. And then, you know, they'll come back again and they'll say, oh, well, you know, 5 years is the best that we can offer. And we were really torn as a family. You know, we wanted to fight for what we believed in. We understood the plant to be a sacrament, and we wanted to fight for that. You know, we wanted to fight for justice, but at the same time, knowing New Jersey's legacy when it comes to mass incarceration, it was a scary fight to fight. And so it was the end of 2016 when Jawara accepted a plea. I believe it was like a 5-year plea, but the lawyers were pretty much saying, like, you know what, you'll probably just do a year and you'll get time served. So you maybe just do about 6 months and you should be fine. You know, you should be able to kind of put this behind you. And so, you know, not wanting to risk going to trial and losing and having him out of his children's lives he has 4 children for, you know, half a decade or so have you, we decided to take the plea, and he turned himself in to Bergen County Jail in January of 2017. And a month and a half later, this was during Black History Month, we were actually getting ready. My mom and I were getting ready to go to Jamaica to have a Peter Tosh celebration. And before, I think the day before we were going to catch the flight, my mom calls me and she's just frantic on the phone, and she's like, Nyambe, it's the hospital in New Jersey. They're saying something about Gamel. We called him Gamel, his middle name. And the doctor was on the phone. It was a surgeon, and he said, we need authorization to perform a life-saving medical procedure on your brother. He's been attacked by another inmate in Bergen County Jail. And that's when we authorized the procedure and immediately redirected our plans to go be by his side at Hackensack Medical Center. And then we caught a flight. We made it to New Jersey, made it to the hospital, only to be told upon entering the hospital that my brother doesn't have the right to have any visitors. Although he was in the ICU fighting for his life, we were told that you need to get permission from the jail. You know, they have hierarchy over the hospital. And so we pretty much, you know, called the jail and were advocating. And I really think that it was the Tosh name that allowed that kind of made them allow us to see my brother. And when we arrived in the surgical ICU, my brother had tubes down his throat. Half of his dreads were shaved off. He was connected to oxygen, and his face was bruised. And he had a handcuff on his ankle, and he was surrounded by correction officers, as if he was some sort of animal, you know. But he was fighting for his life. And so at that moment, you know, I truly knew that my life was forever changed. He had suffered a traumatic brain injury and was, for simplicity, we use the word coma, but really was just unable to really cognitively do anything for himself. And so doctors would often say that he was a vegetable at that time. And that really wasn't the case. When I would see him really fight for his vitality, I would see him stare at me when I come in the room. But from that moment, he was in the ICU for about 3 months. We were able to get him released due to his medical condition, but it was a temporary release, which is pretty sad that if he had regained his vitality and his health, then he would have had to go back to jail. So he came home to Boston, was in the hospital for over 500 days in Boston, and then came home to live with me, where I cared for him along with my mom. We cared for him for about a year. He needed 24-hour care. And through this journey, one of our highlights was really, I couldn't have him go anywhere else. It would have been, that's just the type of family that we have. He had to be amongst us. But it was shortly after we turned to cannabis. We used to try to sneak him, tinctures and things in the hospital, and fish oil as well, therapeutic grade fish oil, which is excellent for the brain, and which all of the doctors were, of course, opposed to. But it wasn't until we really started this holistic regimen that we started to see some of his vitality come back. He was able to kind of stare at us anywhere we were in the room. And he started to verbalize at one point. He even said my name. I said, can you say Nyambe? And he just was like, Nyambe. And I asked him his oldest daughter's name, and he was able to say that. And what's funny is that he was, it was very difficult for him to do anything for himself. But when I gave him a vape pen, he was able to inhale, hold it in, and blow it out his nose at times, or blow it out his mouth. And he had this, people say, this muscle memory that just did not go away through it all. But he fought really hard, to stay with us. And unfortunately, he lost that battle in July of last year, 2020. And so we did launch Justice for Jawara. We actually launched it back in 2017. And we had initiatives where we were raising funds for his care, because a lot of it was holistic, which is just very expensive. But then also we have funding so that we can bring awareness to his story. We have a partnership with Last Prisoner Project, and we have partnered together to kind of share his story on various platforms as well. And so that's an initiative that's really, when people hear, those that have been impacted by the war on drugs, it's just kind of this blanket statement where you really don't understand how families are truly impacted. But it's families that have lost loved ones. It's families, it's children that have lost fathers and mothers. It's people, it's communities that have lost a life, sunshine within their community. He's a fun-loving knucklehead brother. He's this like talented individual. We used to beatbox, and he was very much into rap when we grew up. And I would beatbox, and he would, rap and over the beats. And it wasn't until his early 20s where a friend of my dad's had come into town and was just like, I'm pretty much said he's put him on stage and like put him on stage and had him working with a band. And when he opened his mouth to cover his dad's songs, and you can find some of these on YouTube, I got goosebumps. I was blown away at how talented he was, and how those genes really were deeply embedded in his DNA. He was this fun-loving spirit that, he was compared to my dad all the time. When he was in the room, like he all eyes were on him. He captivated an audience no matter what. And I always loved how no matter where he was confident in himself to always remain himself. I think that sometimes we go out into the world and we feel like, okay, I gotta be this person in this space, and I gotta be this person in that space. But I admire his ability to always stay true to himself, even if it did drive me crazy at times. When you're like, can you? So I'm the opposite of that. I'm the quiet one. And so, but it was this really fun, loving spirit and this love for music and children. So many people called him Uncle Tosh that, weren't even his niece or nephew. And so many, people in the community be like, I'm gonna tell Uncle Tosh if, you don't get your grades right. They're like, no, okay. But, I love that about him. I loved how the type of father that he was. And so it's this journey that we're on to continue to share his story, so that no other family can have to go through what we've gone through, and so that people can understand when we look at ways to support those that have been impacted by the war on drugs. It can't just be, one or two people getting into the cannabis industry. It really has to look like reparations within the Black community. It has to look like programming for children. It has to look like therapy. It has to, we have to think way outside of the box to really right the wrong and start to heal from the damage that has been done.
You can't just wage a war on people for so many decades and then pretend it never happened.
Exactly.
I wonder, I know we're almost out of time, but, we were talking about Jawara, and he was arrested for cannabis possession. And I wonder if you could talk about his relationship with cannabis and how it added value to his life.
Definitely. We didn't grow up as teenagers consuming cannabis, all the time. It was something that kind of happened as we got older. And Jawara often consumed, for his inspiration and his music. He was a very talented individual, and musically was able to kind of jump into any genre of music to express his ideas. And so music, cannabis was something that he turned to for inspiration, but also he was very spiritual and read the Bible from front to back, several times, particularly while he was incarcerated, but also before he would kind of partake in the sacrament in a way that was more connected to the way our indigenous ancestors have, and in the Rastafari community, where you come together and what we call reasoning. You talk about life, you talk about what's going on in the world. There's a consciousness and awakening that you get from building with your brothers and sisters, and and just consuming. And I think that that practice in itself is really what helps hold the community and families together. So it was something that he consumed on a regular basis and very much a part of his life.
We need that now more than ever, people connecting like this.
We do.
This open spiritual focus. I feel like I have a Rastafari shaped hole in my life.
Definitely.
Just listening to you talk about the philosophy. And there's so many amazing things that you've shared with me. I wonder, Nyambe, if there's anything else that you'd like to get into, or anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I'd like to add is that in kind of carrying on this legacy, it was very important for us to have the Peter Tosh name within the cannabis space. And so we are working to launch a brand. And a portion of the proceeds will go back to the Peter Tosh Foundation, because, like I said, having that foundation as literally the foundation of what we build on was very important to the family, so that anything we do really connects back to our core values, and that way we can continue to do good and do what we believe in and what my father believed in the world.
And can you tell us anything about the brand, or when you guys plan to launch?
Yes, we don't have a launch date just yet. We are still fine tuning the brand, but it is really the opportunity for people to support a legacy that really was part of the legalization, like the godfather of the legalization movement, and also in to support families, to support the culture of Rastafari, and to support justice. So we don't have a launch date yet. We are still developing the brand, but we are hoping for early 2022 to really come out there and just be a force in the industry.
Nice. The Bluntness would love to be a part of promoting that launch. That'll
Thank
be really
you.
exciting. So we'll definitely follow up on that. And a lot of things to follow up on, really. Nyambe, this has been so great connecting with you. I feel like I've got 100 other questions I wanted to get curious with you about, and it's been great. And I want to also thank our viewers. If you made it this far into the interview, thank you so much for joining us, for joining the Bluntness with Niambe McIntosh of Peter Tosh Legacy and Brand and Foundation. And that is all for now. Thank you, and take care of yourselves.
Thank you. One last thing is that anyone can learn about the legacy at www.petertosh.com. And we're on every social media platform at Peter Tosh.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Thank you.